All right, welcome to Dhammasukha Meditation Center. The date today is September 7th, I believe, and it was Taco Tuesday. We had a delicious feast, and tonight we have an even better feast. We have a special guest giving a Dhamma talk tonight. He is the author of The Path to Nibbana, also known in Spanish as El Camino a Nibbana, and has been translated into many other languages. And he is also a founder and treasurer of the Dhammasukha Meditation Center. Please give a warm metta for David Johnson.
Thank you, Venerable Karuna. Now we have a real special presentation for you tonight. It will be a little bit of a multimedia, not too much. However, we will be doing some recitations. That's what you have in your hands there. Everybody's got a handout. We're going to learn the links of dependent origination, and we're going to repeat them over and over again until we kind of get them in our minds. Also, you have a chart of dependent origination with you, and it shows all the 12 links. And we won't go through the chart specifically, but we will definitely be touching on the chart. So I'm going to open this with a little reading. So tonight the talk is on dependent origination, and the sutta number is 38, the Mahatanhasankhaya Sutta, the Greater Discourse on the Destruction of Craving. And we'll just open with this from my book here. This is from a quote from the Samyutta Nikāya. Monks, I will teach you dependent origination. Listen to that and attend closely, and I will speak. Yes, Venerable Sir, those monks replied. The Blessed One said this, and what, monks, is dependent origination? With ignorance as condition, formations come to be. With formations as condition, consciousness comes to be. With consciousness as condition, name and form comes to be. That's mentality, materiality. With name and form as condition, the 6 sense bases. With the 6 sense bases as condition, contact. With contact as condition, feeling. With feeling as condition, craving. With craving as condition, clinging. With clinging as condition, existence, or bhava, or habitual tendencies. With habitual tendencies as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. This, monks, is called dependent origination. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes cessation of formations. With the cessation of formations, cessation of consciousness. With the cessation of consciousness, cessation of name and form. With the cessation of name and form, cessation of the 6 sense bases. With the cessation of the 6 sense bases, cessation of contact. With the cessation of contact, cessation of feeling. With the cessation of feeling, cessation of craving. With the cessation of craving, cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, cessation of existence, or bhava. With the cessation of habitual tendencies, cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. The highest goal of TWIM is to see how each link is dependent on or conditioned by the previous link. When one understands this process in a deep and profound way, the unconditioned state, Nibbana, arises. This first instance is the path knowledge. One realizes that there is no personal self or ego, just an impersonal process dependent on conditions. From this realization comes tremendous relief, because as the famous Zen saying goes, no self, No problem. No one is there, so nobody to control. Now this sutta is a bit long, so let's be patient. And let me explain how the sutta works, because it's so long you're going to forget about where I started. So the sutta starts with talking about the links, the mentality, the links of dependent origination and how it works. But then, midway through, it goes back, and some people say, well, dependent origination is when you're born and you grow up and you die. And that's the cycle of existence. But that's part of the cycle of existence. The other part is how your mind thinks. There's a formation, there's consciousness, there's mentality, materiality, there is contact. So it's the process of the mind, of seeing and hearing and tasting. So that's a whole cycle, and that's on the back, on that chart in the back, dependent origination. It's a circle. It's a constant, ever-going circle. And so there is the physical process, and then there is the mental process. And in the meditation, of course, we're more concerned about the physical process. And the more that we don't pay any attention to the body is just, it's a vessel for the mind. And if you close your eyes, there is nothing but mind. Even the feelings in your body are just feelings that are just there. They're not necessarily, if you see the feelings as yourself, but that's just a perception that's arising. It's actually only feeling, just sitting in space, feelings over there. How do you know they're your body? It's all just stuff that's happening in your mind. But so the sutta goes through the mental part, and it goes through how you're born, and it goes through this process of how you're born, you grow up, and you get disgusted with society, and you see the suffering, and then you become a monk, and you become enlightened. And that's where I have to go to. I go from this sutta to Sutta 27, and read the portion from there, and then I come back here. Okay, so let's get going. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Now, on that occasion, a pernicious view had arisen in a bhikkhu named Sati, son of a fisherman. Thus, as I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, it is the same consciousness that runs and wanders through the round of rebirths, not another. Several bhikkhus, having heard about this, went to the bhikkhu Sati and asked him, "Friend Sati, is it true that such a pernicious view has arisen in you?" So what's pernicious about that? Well, the view is that a permanent, everlasting self arises and it just keeps going, that there is, it's like an eternal self that is there, and that's the view that he's proclaiming. This is really the Hindu view of reincarnation, is what he's talking about. And of course, in Buddha, it's rebirth. In Buddhism, it's rebirth. But we'll get into that. So is it true that such a pernicious view has arisen in you? Exactly so, friends. As I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, it is the same consciousness that runs and wanders through the round of rebirths, not another. Then those bhikkhus, desiring to detach him from that pernicious view, pressed and questioned and cross-questioned him thus: "Friend Sati, do not say that. Do not misrepresent the Blessed One. It is not good to misrepresent the Blessed One. The Blessed One would not speak thus, for in many ways the Blessed One has stated consciousness to be dependently arisen, since without a condition there is no origination of consciousness. So consciousness doesn't just hang in the air. There's a condition for it to arise, and then it passes away. Yet although pressed in question and cross-questioned by those bhikkhus in the same way, Bhikkhu Sati, son of a fisherman, evidently Sati hated the smell of fish, and he was the son of a fisherman. So they would, it's a kind of a monk joke. He's a son of a fisherman, just like he doesn't understand. Still obstinately adhered to that pernicious view and continued to insist upon it. Since the bhikkhus were unable to detach him from that pernicious view, they went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, they sat down at one side and told him all that had occurred, adding, "Venerable Sir, since we could not detach the Bhikkhu Sati, son of a fisherman, from this pernicious view, we have reported this matter to the Blessed One." Then the Blessed One addressed a certain bhikkhu thus, "Come, bhikkhu, tell Bhikkhu Sati, son of a fisherman, in my name that the teacher calls him." "Yes, Venerable Sir," he replied, and he went to the Bhikkhu Sati and told him, "The teacher calls you, friend Sati." Now, another theory about this, how they'll say son of a fisherman or shoemaker or something like that, is there probably were a lot of people called Sati. And so you had to differentiate which Sati you're talking about. And interestingly, the name Sati, Bhikkhu Sati, means mindfulness. And so he should have been, smarter. He had the name of being mindful, so Bhikkhu Sati. "The teacher calls you, friend Sati." "Yes, friend," he replied, and he went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, sat down at one side. The Blessed One then asked him, "Sati, is it true that the following pernicious view has arisen in you? As I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, it is the same consciousness that runs and wanders through the round of rebirths, not another." "Exactly so, Venerable Sir. As I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, it is this same consciousness that runs and wanders through the round of rebirths, and not another." Now, one note on that is you'll see in the suttas everywhere where there's this repetition, and it's, what did the Buddha say? And then they say, "Oh, this is what you said, or did I understand that right?" Blah, blah, blah. And they continue and repeat the entire thing again and again. Now, this is probably for the monks who had to memorize and who are memorizing these suttas, especially in Burma. When they become monks, first thing they do is they start memorizing suttas. And they go over it and over it and over. And when somebody's ready, they'll have a circle of monks, and the one who's kind of on the spot is in the middle, and he'll speak the sutta, and if he makes a mistake, somebody will say, "Stop, no, go back, it's this." And so then he'll continue from that spot, and they'll just keep working with him and keep working with him, and pretty soon that he'll get that. But these suttas were memorized from 90 days after the Buddha died, when they got together a council, the first council. They wanted to maintain the teachings of the Buddha so that they weren't forgotten. So they arranged a council, and Mahakassapa, I believe, was the chief, and he assigned the various, like the Majjhima Nikāya was given, I can't remember which one, but it was given to this monk, and Ananda, I believe, had the Anguttara Nikāya, and another monk had the Samyutta Nikāya. So they are all given these, and they chanted these suttas until they were all done, and everybody agreed that they were right. And they've been doing that for 2,600 years, without a stop. in Burma. And that's why, if you want to know the teachings of the Buddha, it's good for you to go back to the suttas, because these are close. They may not be perfect. I mean, who knows? But for the most part, they should be pretty good. No, they were all arhats, so they had no issues. They knew it. Yeah. Ananda had a photographic memory, and that's why he remembered every single thing the Buddha would say. And when the Buddha would go somewhere, he would come back and tell Ananda what he said. And then Ananda would remember it. And then Ananda was very much a key ingredient to the rest of the council, because he did remember everything, and he could say, no, that's wrong, even if somebody missed it. But Ananda was very much key to the whole council. And the backstory of that, Ananda was only a Sotapanna, and the Buddha had died, and they were having the council, and they said, we have to have Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, because without him, we don't have the entire sutta collection. And he's remembered everything, so we need him to come to this council. But nobody was allowed to that council that were not arhats. And so Anuruddha, Venerable Anuruddha, Ananda's cousin, told Ananda to go practice and meditate with diligence so that he could make it to this council. So Ananda that night, the night before, he went and he was going up and down all night trying to meditate, maybe trying a little too hard. And then what happened is he said, I've had enough, I'm just going to go to sleep. And the moment his head touched the pillow, he stopped trying so hard and he became an arhat. And then he flew up into the air and went to the council, and he went down, and they said, where have you been? It's about time, we're getting started. Okay. So then the council was complete.
For administrative reasons.
Okay. What is that consciousness, Sati? Venerable Sir, it is that which speaks and feels and experiences here and there the results of good and bad actions. Misguided man, to whom have you ever known me to teach the Dhamma in that way? Misguided man, have I not stated in many ways consciousness to be dependently arisen, since without a condition there is no origination of consciousness? But you, misguided man, have misrepresented us by your wrong grasp, and injured yourself and stored up much demerit. For this will lead to your harm and suffering for a long time. And evidently later Sati did disrobe, and the last he was seen was in a hell realm. Then the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus, Bhikkhus, what do you think? Has the Bhikkhu Sati, son of a fisherman, kindled even a spark of wisdom in this Dhamma and discipline? How could he, Venerable Sir? No, Venerable Sir. When this was said, the Bhikkhu Sati, son of a fisherman, sat silent, dismayed, with shoulders drooping and head down, glum and without response. Then, knowing this, the Blessed One told him, Misguided man, you will be recognized by your own pernicious view. I shall question the bhikkhus on this matter. Then the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus, Bhikkhus, do you understand the Dhamma taught by me as the Bhikkhu Sati, son of a fisherman, does when he misrepresents us by his wrong grasp and injures himself and stores up much demerit? No, Venerable Sir. For in many ways, for in many discourses, the Blessed One has stated consciousness to be dependently arisen, since without a condition there is no origination of consciousness. Good bhikkhus, it is good that you understand the Dhamma taught by me thus. For in many ways I have stated consciousness to be dependently arisen, since without a condition there is no origination of consciousness. But this Bhikkhu Sati, son of a fisherman, misrepresents us by his wrong grasp and injures himself and stores up much demerit. for this will lead to his harm and suffering of this misguided man for a long time. And there are some stories of people arguing with the Buddha, and later they died and they ended up in the lower realms just because of that, because of their wrong view, and they argued with a Buddha. There's a lot of merit to be made and a lot of demerit to be made, so be careful how you are when the next Buddha comes.
You have to always agree with Buddha, and then you get married.
Yeah, it's best to say, yes, that's correct, I agree, yeah. Because it is said that the Buddha never made a mistake. However, he did put some rules down that he had to kind of withdraw. But whenever he talked about the Dhamma, he never made a mistake. Everything he said was perfect. That's pretty good. Okay, the next section is the conditionality of consciousness. Bhikkhus, consciousness is reckoned. Now we're going to get into what is consciousness. And it isn't really what you think, what everybody says it is. Bhikkhus, consciousness is reckoned by the particular condition dependent upon which it arises. When consciousness arises, dependent on the I and forms, it is reckoned as I consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on the ear and sounds, it is reckoned as ear consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on the nose and odors, it is reckoned as nose consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on the tongue and flavors, it is reckoned as tongue consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on the body and tangibles, it is reckoned as body consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on the mind and mind objects, it is reckoned as mind consciousness. Just as fire is reckoned by the particular condition dependent upon which it burns. When fire burns dependent on logs, it is reckoned as a log fire. When the fire burns dependent on wood chips, it is reckoned as a wood chip fire. When fire burns dependent on grass, it is reckoned as a grass fire. When fire burns dependent on cow dung, it is reckoned as a cow dung fire. When fire burns dependent on chaff, it is reckoned as chaff fire. When fire burns dependent on rubbish, it is reckoned as a rubbish fire. So too, consciousness is reckoned by the particular condition dependent upon which it arises. So, when you have a candle and you have a flame, and you light the candle, and it springs up with fire and light, and you light another candle from that candle, was that flame the same? Is there an underlying consciousness which experiences everything? When you hear a sound, is there a consciousness just waiting inside you, this big bubble where a sound is coming in and then a sight is coming in? No. When there's a sound, there's the process of dependent origination. It arises, there's consciousness, and it passes away. One moment at a time. Okay. When consciousness arises dependent on the I and forms, it is reckoned as I consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on the mind and mind objects, it is reckoned as mind consciousness. And so on. Make sure that I didn't. Yeah. So when you have consciousness arise upon your eye, it's not the same consciousness that arose on your ear. It's a completely different consciousness. And when it disappears, it dies. It's gone. And then something else comes into the sense door and it vibrates. And consciousness arises and you hear. And then something else is shaking over here. That passes away. The mind goes, it sees that. And this is how this process of mentality and materiality continues forward. You are just this constant arising and passing away of the senses coming in and hitting all of these. And plus, when you see things, it's going to trigger thoughts. Or you see a person, it triggers a feeling. Maybe you don't like that person, triggers anger. So there's mental tendencies that are arising. Or the sun beats down and you feel the heat, and now you feel, oh, I'm hot. I am this. I am seen. And now you take this as personal. This is yours. But it is just only consciousness arising and passing away independently. General questionnaire on being. Bhikkhus, do you see this has come to be? Yes, Venerable Sir. Bhikkhus, do you see its origination occurs with that as nutriment? Yes, Venerable Sir. Bhikkhus, do you see with the cessation of that nutriment, what has come to be is subject to cessation? Yes, Venerable Sir. So just as a fire burns, the log burns, it burns up, and that's the nutriment of the fire, and then it's gone. And without the log, there can be no fire. And when the log disappears, the fire disappears. Bhikkhus, does doubt arise when one is uncertain thus? Has this come to be? Yes, Venerable Sir. Bhikkhus, does doubt arise when one is uncertain thus? Does its origination occur with that as nutriment? Yes, Venerable Sir. Bhikkhus, does doubt arise when one is uncertain thus? With the cessation of that nutriment, is what has come to be is subject to cessation? Yes, Venerable Sir. Now this is a kind of a strangely written paragraph. It's kind of written in the negative. Does doubt arise when one is uncertain? So if you have doubts and you are uncertain, well, does doubt arise when one is uncertain? If you don't know that this has come to be based on that nutriment, then does doubt arise? In other words, if you don't know the process, then you have doubts and you just don't know. It's just kind of a way to turn it around to ask the question instead of, if you see this as condition and this arises, then are you certain that this is how this works, and do you have any doubts? Oh no, we would never have any doubts. That's the way it works if you understand. Anyway, it's definitely an interesting paragraph. Bhikkhus, is doubt abandoned in one who sees as it actually is with proper... Now see, this is the paragraph is going to be the reverse of the last one. It's going to say, is doubt abandoned in one who sees as it actually is with proper wisdom thus? This has come to be. Yes, Venerable Sir. Bhikkhus, is doubt abandoned in one who sees as it actually is with proper wisdom thus? Its origination occurs with that as nutriment. Yes, Venerable Sir. Bhikkhus, is doubt abandoned in one who sees as it actually is with proper wisdom thus? With the cessation of that nutriment, what has come to be is subject to cessation. Yes, Venerable Sir. So if you see dependent origination and how it works, you won't have any doubts. And that's what your meditation is doing, is you're watching how the hindrances come up and how they disappear. And this is all a part of dependent origination. You see and you hear, you have a feeling, and all of the links. So you're watching that all day long in your meditation and learning how it works. Bhikkhus, Bhikkhus, are you thus free from doubt here? This has come to be. Yes, Venerable Sir. Bhikkhus, are you thus free from doubt here? Its origination occurs with that as nutriment. Yes, Venerable Sir. Bhikkhus, are you thus free from doubt here? With the cessation of that nutriment, what has come to be is subject to cessation. Yes, Venerable Sir. Bhikkhus, has it been seen well by you as it actually is with proper wisdom thus, this has come to be? Yes, Venerable Sir. Bhikkhus, has it been seen well by you as it actually is with proper wisdom thus, its origination occurs with that as nutriment? Yes, Venerable Sir. Bhikkhus, has it been seen well by you as it actually is with proper wisdom thus, with the cessation of that nutriment, what has come to be is subject to cessation? Yes, Venerable Sir, they understand. Bhikkhus, purified and bright as this view is, if you adhere to it, cherish it, treasure it and treat it as a possession, would you then understand that the Dhamma has been taught as similar to a raft, being for the purpose of crossing over, not for the purpose of grasping or clinging or holding on to? No, Venerable Sir. Bhikkhus, purified and bright as this view is, if you do not adhere to it, cherish it, treasure it, and treat it as a possession, would you then understand that the Dhamma has been taught as similar to a raft, being just for the purpose of crossing over, not for the purpose of grasping? Yes, Venerable Sir. So you've heard about how the Dhamma is like you have to ford the river, you get a raft, you get in the raft, and then you get to the other side, and the question is, do you keep walking with the raft on your head, or you leave the raft and just continue? So in other words, even if you thought about all these things, these right views, and you adhered to them and treasured them and thought about them all the time, you could not attain Nibbana because you're thinking and you're attached to the views. So even that has to be left. You can read it, but you have to understand it, and then you leave the words behind, and then you just have the experience. Bhikkhus, there are these 4 kinds of nutriment for the maintenance of beings that already have come to be, for the support of those about to come to be. What for? They are physical food as nutriment, gross or subtle. Now, gross can mean like the food that we have here, but subtle actually means like deva food. It can be the ambrosia of the devas. The second nutriment is contact. Contact as the second, mental volition as the third, and consciousness as the fourth. Now, bhikkhus, these 4 kinds of nutriment have what as their source, what as their origin, from what are they born and produced. These 4 kinds of nutriment have craving as their source, craving as their origin. They are born and produced from craving. And this craving has what as its source? Craving has feeling as its source. And this feeling, what as its source? Feeling has contact as its source. And this contact has what as its source? Contact has the 6-fold base as its source. And this 6-fold base has what as its source? The 6-fold base has mentality, materiality as its source. And this mentality, materiality has what as its source? Mentality, materiality has consciousness as its source. And this consciousness has what as its source? Consciousness has formations as its source. And these formations have what as their source? What are their origin? From what are they born and produced? Formations have ignorance as their source. Ignorance as their origin, they are born and produced from ignorance. And you know that ignorance is what Bhante said the other night. It's not understanding the Four Noble Truths. And just not understanding the process of dependent origination, that craving is the cause, and thus we continue, we see things and we like them and we're attached and we just continue the cycle because of ignorance. And when we see these things are full of suffering, that they're leading to thoughts and to suffering and to emotions. When we see that, we say, no, I'm going to siksar that. And that, of course, is wisdom. Now, the 4 kinds of nutriment, you'll probably wonder, the first one is food. Of course, there's food for your body. And that's pretty obvious. That's a nutriment. The second one is contact. So when there's a sense, say a sound, and it hits the ear and vibrates, that is a nutriment to hearing. You want to hear, there's the sound, and your craving comes up, you go, here. You wanted food, you want to hear, you want to see, that's contact. The second one, mental volition or thoughts, actions. So you think of something you want to do, craving comes up and says, yeah, I want to do that. I want to go have some tea. So that's another that feeds your mind, keeps you going on the cycle. All of these thoughts, these actions that are coming up. And the fourth one is consciousness itself. So when you become conscious of something, and feeling and perception start to arise, and you know what that consciousness is, you get curious about what that is, and your mind goes, oh, I want to go see what that's all about. Even just being conscious. Because of ignorance, you continue forward and investigate it and go down the links of dependent origination over and over again just because you saw something or you're aware of it. Okay, so I think this is where, get out your pieces of paper. So we're going to now learn the dependent origination links. And the first one down here, so monks with ignorance as condition, with formations as condition, with consciousness as condition, with mentality, materiality as condition, with the sixfold base as condition, with contact as condition,
feeling comes to be.
With feeling as condition,
Craving comes to be.
with craving as condition,
Clinging comes to be.
with clinging as condition,
Habitual tendencies come to be.
with habitual tendencies as condition,
Birth comes to be.
with birth as condition,
Aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair come to be.
such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. Reverse order questionnaire on arising. Now we're going to go backwards. With birth as condition, aging and death comes to be. So it was said, now monks, do aging and death have birth as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Aging and death has birth as condition in our souls. Thus we take it in this case. With birth as condition, aging and death comes to be.
With habitual tendencies as condition, birth comes to be. So it was said, now monks, does birth have habitual tendencies as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Birth has habitual tendencies as condition in our souls. Thus we take it in this case. With habitual tendencies as condition, birth comes to be.
With clinging as condition, habitual tendencies come to be. So it was said, now monks, does habitual tendencies have clinging as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Habitual tendencies have clinging as condition in our souls. Thus we take it in this case. With clinging as condition, habitual tendencies come to be.
With craving as condition, clinging comes to be, so it was said. Now, monks, does clinging have craving as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Clinging is craving thus we take it in this case. With craving as condition, clinging comes to be.
With feeling as condition, craving comes to be, so it was said. Now, monks, does craving have feeling as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Craving is feeling as condition, thus we take it in this case. With feeling as condition, craving comes to be.
With contact as condition, feeling comes to be, so it was said. Now, monks, does feeling have contact as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Feeling is contact as condition, thus we take it in this case. With contact as condition, feeling comes to be.
With the sixfold base as condition, contact comes to be, so it was said. Now, monks, does contact have the sixfold base as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Contact has the sixfold base as condition, thus we take it in this case. With the sixfold base as condition, contact comes to be.
With mentality, materiality as condition, the sixfold base comes to be, so it was said. Now, monks, does the sixfold base have mentality, materiality as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
The sixfold base has mentality, materiality as condition, thus we take it in this case. With mentality, materiality as condition, the sixfold base comes to be.
With consciousness as condition, mentality, materiality come to be, so it was said. Now, monks, does mentality, materiality have consciousness as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Mentality, materiality as consciousness as condition, thus we take it in this case. With consciousness as condition, mentality, materiality comes to be.
With formations as condition, consciousness comes to be, so it was said. Now, monks, does consciousness have formations as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Consciousness has formations as condition, thus we take it in this case. With formations as condition, consciousness comes to be.
With ignorance as condition, formations come to be, so it was said. Now, monks, do formations have ignorance as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Formations have ignorance as condition, thus we take it in this case. With ignorance as condition, formations come to be.
Good monks, so you say thus, and I also say thus. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. That is, with ignorance as condition,
Formations come to be.
with formations as condition,
Consciousness comes to be.
with consciousness as condition,
Mentality, materiality comes to be.
with mentality, materiality as condition,
The sixfold base comes to be.
with the sixfold base as condition,
Contact comes to be.
with contact as condition,
Feeling comes to be.
with feeling as condition,
Craving comes to be.
with craving as condition,
Clinging comes to be.
with clinging as condition,
Habitual tendencies comes to be.
with habitual tendencies as condition,
Birth comes to be.
with birth as condition,
Aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair come to be.
such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of.
Formation.
With the cessation of formations comes the cessation of consciousness. With the cessation of consciousness comes the cessation of.
Mentality, materiality.
With the cessation of mentality, materiality comes the cessation of.
Sixfold base.
With the cessation of the sixfold base comes the cessation of.
Contact.
With the cessation of contact comes the cessation of.
Feeling.
With the cessation of feeling comes the cessation of.
Craving.
With the cessation of craving comes the cessation of.
Clinging.
With the cessation of clinging comes the cessation of.
Habitual tendencies.
With the cessation of habitual tendencies comes the cessation of.
Birth.
Cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. Reverse order questionnaire on cessation. With the cessation of birth comes the cessation of aging and death, so it was said. Now monks, do aging and death cease with the cessation of birth or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Aging and death ceases with the cessation of birth, sir. Thus we take it in this case. With the cessation of birth, the cessation of aging and death occurs.
Birth ceases with the cessation. With the cessation of habitual tendencies comes the cessation of birth. Oh, did I do that one? Wait. Oh, okay. So it was said, now monks, does birth cease with the cessation of habitual tendencies or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Birth ceases with the cessation of habitual tendencies, sir. Thus we take it in this case. With the cessation of habitual tendencies, the cessation of birth occurs.
With the cessation of clinging comes the cessation of habitual tendencies. So it was said, now monks, do habitual tendencies cease with the cessation of clinging or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Habitual tendencies cease with the cessation of clinging, sir. Thus we take it in this case. With the cessation of clinging, the cessation of habitual tendencies occurs.
With the cessation of craving comes the cessation of clinging. So it was said, now monks, does clinging cease with the cessation of craving or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Clinging ceases with the cessation of craving, sir. Thus we take it in this case. With the cessation of craving, the cessation of clinging occurs.
With the cessation of feeling comes the cessation of craving. So it was said, now monks, does craving cease with the cessation of feeling or not? How do you take it in this case?
Craving ceases with the cessation of feeling, sir. Thus we take it in this case. With the cessation of feeling, the cessation of craving occurs.
With the cessation of contact comes the cessation of feeling. So it was said, now monks, does feeling cease with the cessation of contact or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Feeling ceases with the cessation of contact, sir. Thus we take it in this case. With the cessation of contact, the cessation of feeling occurs.
With the cessation of the sixfold base comes the cessation of contact. So it was said, now monks, does contact cease with the cessation of the sixfold base or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Contact ceases with the cessation of the sixfold base, sir. Thus we take it in this case. With the cessation of the sixfold base, the cessation of contact occurs.
With the cessation of mentality, materiality comes the cessation of the sixfold base. So it was said, now monks, does the sixfold base cease with the cessation of mentality, materiality, or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
The sixfold base ceases with the cessation of mentality, materiality, sir. Thus we take it in this case. With the cessation of mentality, materiality, the cessation of the sixfold base occurs.
With the cessation of consciousness comes the cessation of mentality, materiality. So it was said, now monks, does mentality, materiality cease with the cessation of consciousness or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Mentality, materiality ceases with the cessation of consciousness,
With the cessation of formations comes the cessation of consciousness, so it was said. Now, monks, does consciousness cease with the cessation of formations or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Consciousness ceases with the cessation of formations, no, sir. Thus we take it in this case. With the cessation of formations, the cessation of consciousness occurs.
With the cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of formations, so it was said. Now, monks, do formations cease with the cessation of ignorance or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Formation ceases with the cessation of ignorance. Thus we take it in this case. With the cessation of ignorance, the cessation of formation occurs.
So just a note about the links. There's 12 links, but the first link is not a real thing. But the other links after that are real, and you can see them in your meditation. Ignorance is just, you don't know, and you don't understand. You don't see the process. And so that's not something that you see, but it is an understanding. And once you have wisdom, you see the links of dependent origination as selfless, empty of self, impersonal, suffering, causing suffering, and impermanent, and arising and passing away, and just not to be clung to. And that's the ignorance part. And that's why in the neuroscience world that the idea, I think, is if you can get the mind slowed down enough and you can make it stop, and then when it comes back, you can see just very clearly how things work, that the neuroscience world says, well, if we can just get everything slow enough, we can attain Nibbana. But there's the first link here, which is ignorance. And when your meditation progresses to where it needs to, you'll start to see all of these links as not worth holding on to. And you will 6R them and you'll go, that's right. I just don't find them interesting anymore. And you'll let them go. And that's because you understand it. And then your mind will come to this still stopped point. And it won't happen unless you understand how it happened. Because you know that if you just sit here and you do nothing at all, your mind will continue and you'll just be lost in thought. So without the 6R process, to bring that mind to keep calming every single little action that or the movement that occurs, the mind won't stop. And there will be we get down to the last little popping up of the energy, and you relax, release, you start to see that it will never stop unless you 6R. It will continue forever. And you get first disenchanted, and then you get dispassionate. You go, well, I can't stop it, so I just give up paying attention to it. I'm just done with it. I'm just not interested anymore. That's called dispassion. And then the mind goes, and it does stop, and it ceases. And then, if you're lucky, Nibbana arises. But it's ignorance is the key here. That's why you're not ever going to do it with a pill or a machine. I wish you could. But you can certainly measure these states once they're attained. And I think we have some ideas to start measuring some of the students that have the ability to have a stopping of consciousness, a cessation for some period of time. And we're hoping to do some experiments on them. But and I think that would probably, as Bhante said, it would blow the minds of the neuroscientists that somebody would just go flatline and yet still be alive. And then they come out because they made a determination. And they say, how are you still alive? Oh, I feel great, No, that's...
The brain, because all you can measure is the brain, right? So wouldn't the brain still be processing all the bodily functions in the background?
There's a bodily formations that are going, but you're not conscious of it. But the mental activity.
This is not all the brain, just
Yeah.
There was a muse.
The full mode network.
No, so there was a study done using the muse, and it did flatline for cessation. But the electrodes are only on the outer cortex, right? It's hard with the EEG to measure the deep brain. So it's possible there's still a little activity in the brain stem, like keeping the body alive.
Okay, yeah, okay.
But there's no mental activity.
Yeah. It's the most tranquil state that you will ever get to. Because your mind is always going. And you go, well, I'll just be tranquil. What's the ultimate tranquility? No activity at all. And you come out of that, and you are so alive and so awake and so happy. So that's what we're going for. So the last section, recapitulation on cessation. Good monks, so you say thus, and I also say thus. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases. That is, with the cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of formations. With the cessation of formations comes the cessation of consciousness. With the cessation of consciousness comes the cessation of materiality. With the cessation of mentality, materiality comes the cessation of the sixfold base. With the cessation of the sixfold base comes the cessation of contact. With the cessation of contact comes the cessation of feeling. With the cessation of feeling comes the cessation of craving. With the cessation of craving comes the cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging comes the cessation of habitual tendencies. With the cessation of habitual tendencies comes the cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. Personal knowledge. Bhikkhus, knowing and seeing in this way, would you run back to the past? Wait a minute. Yeah, okay. So bhikkhus, knowing and seeing in this way, would you run back to the past thus? Were we in the past? Were we not in the past? What were we in the past? How were we in the past? Having been what did we become in the past? No, Venerable Sir. Now what are we talking about? Papancha, thinking, clinging, creating ourself in our own mind. Knowing and seeing in this way, knowing the links, seeing the links clearly, would you run forward to the future thus? Shall we be in the future? Shall we not be in the future? What shall we be in the future? How shall we be in the future? Having been what shall we become in the future? No, Venerable Sir, thinking about the future. What are your plans? What are you going to do? And that's you. You're creating this idea of you now again. You're not in the present anymore. But wait a minute. Knowing and seeing in this way, would you now be inwardly perplexed about the present thus? Am I? Am I not? What am I? How am I? Where has this being come from? Where will it go? No, Venerable Sir. So that's just thinking about right now. You can get lost in thinking about what's happening just right now, and take it all personally, unless you 6R those thoughts. Bhikkhus, knowing and seeing in this way, would you speak thus? The teacher is respected by us. We speak as we do out of respect for the teacher? No, Venerable Sir. Knowing and seeing in this way, would you speak thus? The recluse says this, and we speak thus at the bidding of the recluse. No, Venerable Sir. Knowing and seeing in this way, would you acknowledge another teacher? No, Venerable Sir. Knowing and seeing in this way, would you return to the observances, tumultuous debates, and auspicious signs of ordinary recluses and Brahmins, taking them as the core of the holy life? No, Venerable Sir. Do you speak only of what you have known, seen, and understood for yourselves? Yes, Venerable Sir. Good bhikkhus. So you have been guided by me with this Dhamma, which is visible here and now, immediately effective, inviting inspection, onward leading, to be experienced by the wise for themselves. For it was with reference to this that has been said, Bhikkhus, this Dhamma is visible here and now, immediately effective, inviting inspection, onward leading, to be experienced by the wise for themselves. Now we're going to get into how this affects body, now the physical part of the universe. The round of existence, conception to maturity. Because the descent of the embryo takes place through the union of three things. Here there is the union of the mother and father, but the mother is not in season, and the Gandhabba is not present. That's the being that is coming. In this case, no descent of an embryo takes place. Here there is the union of the mother and father, and the mother is in season, but the Gandhabba is not present. In this case, too, no descent of the embryo takes place. But when there is the union of the mother and father, the mother is in season, and the Gandhabba, or the future being, is present. Through the union of these three things, the descent of the embryo takes place. The Buddha really got into how it all works. The mother then carries the embryo in her womb for 9 or 10 months. 10 months would be the moon calendar, because there's 28 days in a moon month. The mother carries this embryo in her womb for 9 or 10 months with much anxiety as a heavy burden. Then at the end of 9 or 10 months, the mother gives birth with much anxiety as a heavy burden. Then when the child is born, she nourishes it with her own blood. For the mother's breast milk is called the blood in the Noble One's discipline. When he grows up and his faculties mature, the child plays at such games as toy plows, tip-cat, somersaults, toy windmills, toy measures, toy cars. I'm not sure how they had cars back then, but maybe it's car without. Yeah, little chariots. And a toy bow and arrow. When he grows up and his faculties mature still further, the youth enjoys himself provided and endowed with the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, with forms cognizable by the eye, sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, flavors cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body that are wished for, desirable, agreeable, likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. The continuation of the round. On seeing a form with the eye, he lusts after it if it is pleasing. He dislikes it if it is unpleasing. He abides with mindfulness of the body unestablished, with a limited mind, and he does not understand as it actually is the deliverance of mind and the deliverance by wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. Engaged as he is in favoring and opposing, whatever feeling he feels, whether pleasant or painful or neither painful nor pleasant, he delights in that feeling, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. As he does so, delight arises in him. Now delight in feelings is clinging. With his clinging as condition, being comes to be. with being as condition, or habitual tendencies, as condition, birth, with birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. On hearing a sound with the ear, on smelling an odor with the nose, on tasting a flavor with the tongue, on touching a tangible with the body, on cognizing a mind object with the mind. Now see, these are all ... things. So this entire paragraph before it, I'd have to repeat if the whole sutta was here. It's a lot of words. This book would probably be 3 times bigger. On cognizing a mind object with the mind, he lusts after it if it is pleasing. He dislikes it if it is unpleasing. Now delight in feelings is clinging. With his clinging as condition, being comes to be. With being as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair come to be. Such is this origin of this whole mass of suffering. So the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, liking, he likes and dislikes, and that causes all these thoughts and the whole round. The ending of the round. He gets himself in trouble, he ends up in AA and whatever else. Now the ending of the round, the gradual training. Here bhikkhus, a Tathagata appears in the world, accomplished, fully enlightened. All right, I have to go to the other sutta. Fully enlightened, perfect in true knowledge and conduct, sublime, knower of worlds, incomparable leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, enlightened, blessed. He declares this world with its gods, its maras, and its brahmas, this generation with its recluses and brahmins, its princes and its people, which he has himself realized with direct knowledge. He teaches the Dhamma good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. And he reveals a holy life that is utterly perfect and pure. A householder or householder's son, or one born in some other clan, hears that Dhamma. On hearing the Dhamma, he acquires faith in the Tathagata. Possessing that faith, he considers thus: household life is crowded and dusty. Life gone forth is wide open. It is not easy, while living in a home, to lead the holy life, utterly perfect and pure as a polished shell. Suppose I shave off my hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go from the home life to Dhammasukha Meditation Center. On a later occasion, abandoning a small or a large fortune, abandoning a small and large circle of relatives, he shaves off his hair and beard and puts on the yellow robe and goes forth from the home life into homelessness. Having thus gone forth, possessing the bhikkhu's training and that way of life, abandoning the killing of living beings, he abstains from killing living beings, with rod and weapon laid aside. Consciousness, merciful, he abides compassionate to all living beings. Abandoning the taking of what is not given, he abstains from the taking what is not given, taking only what is given, expecting only what is given. By not stealing, he abides in purity. Abandoning incelibacy, he observes celibacy. Living apart, abstaining from the vulgar practice of sexual intercourse. Abandoning false speech, he abstains from false speech. He speaks truth, adheres to truth, is trustworthy and reliable, one who is no deceiver of the world. Abandoning malicious speech, he abstains from malicious speech. He does not repeat elsewhere what he has heard here in order to divide those people from these, nor does he repeat to these people what he has heard elsewhere in order to divide these people from those. Thus he is one who reunites those who are divided, a promoter of friendships, who enjoys concord, rejoices in concord, delights in concord, a speaker of words that promote concord. Abandoning harsh speech, he abstains from harsh speech. He speaks such words as are gentle, pleasing to the ear and lovable, as go to the heart, are courteous, desired by many, and agreeable to many. Abandoning gossip, he abstains from gossip. He speaks at the right time, speaks what is fact, speaks on what is good, speaks on the Dhamma and the discipline. At the right time he speaks such words that are worth recording, reasonable, moderate, and beneficial. He abstains. Now this is all the 5 precepts right here. Actually the 4 precepts so far. He abstains from injuring seeds and plants. Now this is more for a monk. These are the monk's rules for a higher ordination. He practices eating only 1 meal a day, abstaining from eating at night and outside the proper time. He abstains from dancing, singing, music, and theatrical shows. He abstains from wearing garlands, smartening himself with scent, and embellishing himself with unguents. He abstains from high and large couches. He abstains from accepting gold and silver. He abstains from accepting raw grain. He abstains from accepting raw meat. That would mean he could cook it and keep and hold on to it. And a monk is always dependent upon the lay people for what he needs. Otherwise, he could just go off and just go to the forest and you never see them again. And so they have this kind of osmotic relationship where the monks need the lay people and the lay people learn from the monks. So they have to depend on each other. He abstains from going on errands and running messages. He abstains from buying and selling. He abstains from false weights, false metals, and false measures. He abstains from accepting bribes, deceiving, defrauding, and trickery. He abstains from wounding, murdering, binding, brigandage, plunder, and violence. Well, I hope so. He abstains from accepting women and girls. He abstains from accepting men and women slaves. He abstains from accepting goats and sheep. He abstains from accepting fowl and pigs. He abstains from accepting elephants, cattle, horses, and mares. He abstains from accepting fields and lands. He becomes content with robes to protect his body and with alms food to maintain his stomach. And wherever he goes, he sets out taking only these with him. Just as a bird, wherever it goes, flies with its wings as its only burden, so too the bhikkhu becomes content with robes to protect his body and with alms food to maintain his stomach. And wherever he goes, he sets out taking only these with him. Possessing this aggregate of noble virtue, he experiences within himself a bliss that is blameless. On seeing a form with the eye, he does not grasp at its signs and features, since if he left the eye faculty unguarded, evil, unwholesome states of covetousness and grief might invade him. He practiced the way of its restraint. He guards the eye faculty. He undertakes the restraint of the eye faculty, on hearing a sound with the ear, on smelling an odor with the nose, on tasting a flavor with the tongue, on touching a tangible with the body, on cognizing a mind object with the mind. He does not grasp at its signs and features. Since if he left the mind faculty unguarded, evil, unwholesome states of covetous and greed might invade him. He practices the way of its restraint. He guards the mind faculty. He undertakes the restraint of the mind faculty. Possessing this noble restraint of the faculties, he experiences within himself a bliss that is unsullied. He becomes one who acts in full awareness when going forward and returning, who acts in full awareness when looking ahead and looking away, who acts in full awareness when flexing and extending his limbs, who acts in full awareness when wearing his robes and carrying his outer robe and bowl, who acts in full awareness when eating, drinking, consuming food, and tasting. And how do you do that? By the process of the 6 R's and smiling while you do everything. Possessing this aggregate of noble virtue and this noble restraint of the faculties, possessing this noble mindfulness and full awareness, he resorts to a secluded resting place, the forest, the root of a tree, a mountain, a ravine, a hillside cave, a charnel ground, a jungle thicket, an open space, a heap of straw. On returning from his alms round after his meal, he sits down, folding his legs crosswise, setting his body erect, and establishing mindfulness before him. Abandoning covetousness for the world, he abides with the mind free from covetousness, which is desire, just craving. He purifies his mind from covetousness, just sensual desire in this case. Abandoning ill will and hatred, he abides with a mind free from ill will. Compassionate for the welfare of all living beings, he purifies his mind from ill will and hatred. Abandoning sloth and torpor, he abides free from sloth and torpor. Percipient of light, mindful and fully aware, he purifies his mind from sloth and torpor. Abandoning restlessness and remorse, he abides unagitated with a mind inwardly peaceful. He purifies his mind from restlessness and remorse. Abandoning doubt, he abides having gone beyond doubt, unperplexed about wholesome states. He purifies his mind from doubt. Now we go back to Sutta 38. Having thus abandoned these 5 hindrances, imperfections of the mind that weaken wisdom, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, he enters upon and abides in the first jhana. With the stilling of applied and sustained thought, he enters upon and abides in the second jhana. With the fading away as well of rapture, he enters upon and abides in the third jhana. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, he enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure and purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. The ending of the round, full cessation. So now he's a monk, he's meditated, he's done the 5 precepts, he's gone through the jhanas, and now what's next? On seeing a form with the eye, he does not lust after it, if it is pleasing. He does not dislike it, if it is unpleasing. He abides with mindfulness of the body established, with an immeasurable mind, and he understands as it actually is the deliverance of the mind, deliverance by wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. Having thus abandoning, favoring, opposing, whatever feeling he feels, whether pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, he does not delight in that feeling, welcome it, or remain holding to it. As he does not do so, delight in feelings cease in him. With the cessation of his delight comes cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, cessation of being. With the cessation of being, cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. On hearing a sound with the ear, on smelling an odor with the nose, on tasting a flavor with the tongue, on touching a tangible with the body, on cognizing a mind object with the mind, he does not lust after it, if it is pleasing. He does not dislike it, if it is unpleasing. With the cessation of his delight comes cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, cessation of habitual tendencies. With the cessation of being, habitual tendencies, cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. Conclusion. Bhikkhus, remember this discourse of mine briefly as deliverance in the destruction of craving. But remember the bhikkhu Sati, son of a fisherman, as caught up in a vast net of craving, in the trammel of craving. This is what the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So, one thing we should talk about real quick is reincarnation. So the idea of reincarnation is that there's an eternal soul that is constantly coming into birth, and he experiences this, and then he dies, and then he goes to another birth. But there's this eternal, this consciousness, soul, energy that is non-stop. It never stops. But in what we're learning here is that consciousness is not permanent. It arises, and then we ourselves come into being, and then it disappears, and we die. And then something else happens from a condition, and we come into existence, and then we die. So reincarnation says that everything happens to this soul. But what we're saying here is that there's nobody here for anything to happen to. When there's a sound, it hits the ear, this organ, and there's a contact made, and a feeling, maybe it's a loud sound, a feeling happens, and it's really loud, and then craving comes up, and you don't like that sound. And then you think about that sound. Oh, where'd that sound come from? And who's doing this? And all of these things. And then habitual tendencies come up that I wish these sounds would not happen like this, and you start to think about what you can do in the future to avoid these sounds and close the doors. And then birth happens, and you get up and you may just close the door. And thus, if you had just 6R'd that sound, 6R'd the first contact of the sound arising, all of the suffering would not have arisen, the craving would not have come up. And that's how the relief happens, when you let go of all of these sense bases. So that's, you come into being when something outside comes in and creates you. You don't create it, it creates you. And you can let it go, and you can decide whether you are affected by it or not. It's up to you. If you 6R, you let it go. If you don't, then you're at its mercy, and you are caught in that trammel of craving.
What I was saying about the Bhavanga being present, am I understanding that...
The Gandhava.
Sorry.
Yeah. Gandhava, yeah.
Am I understanding right that if there's this chain of events happening to one person and they die, that has to happen at the same time that there's another birth over here?
Yeah.
So
there's no stopping, yeah.
Yeah, so if you could find someone, for example, that died the instant you were born, that's probably your past life.
Yeah, yeah. But of course there's many books and things about near-death experiences, and people who die, they'll die and they'll go into another realm, and then they'll take birth, in some future time. But the moment they come into existence in the other realm, they're born there. But then some beings they immediately take human birth, and some beings take a lower realm birth. There's all there's the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and there's 48 days of the Bardo, and all these theories about what happens. But the Buddha's idea is that as soon as you die, that next energy, which he calls the Gandhava, alights on the next thing. It's not permanent, it's just a product of the last thought. Yeah. Well, it is said in the suttas that there are 4 ways to attain arahatship. One of those ways is at death, that if you're not an arahat, you become an arahat at death. You just basically 6R, moving forward, and you attain arahatship at that. Yeah. Yeah, you just see it and you go, oh. I mean, I think it really is. It's a 6R. It's just like, nope. Relax. Let it go. So any questions or anything? I know we could talk all night, but we don't want to do that, of course. Yeah.
So I have a question. So a lot of the suttas, okay, at least what we've heard so far, started talking about from the sixfold base, like when I something, right? I feel the later part is kind of easier to understand.
Yeah, the higher part, yeah,
right,
after contact.
Really, I mean, we haven't really heard talking about, like, in depth, the first part. So I think that's something to understand through meditation, because it's just really hard to understand the first.
Well, you're not going to see the first parts up to contact. These just potentials, it's energies that are in the mind. And it's like when the sound happens, they say, well, consciousness arises at contact, right? Yeah, but it's already coming. There's a formation here which has a desire to go look at something. And then consciousness comes from that. And then it turns into mentality and materiality, which means feeling and perception start to appear, and your idea of self is starting to come up. And then it hits the object, and all of that stuff opens up, and you hear. So all of these little things, you can't actually see them, but they're there. And when you attain Nibbana, you may see those links, and they can be little dots or little bubbles, and they're not labeled or anything. You just see this energies happen, and they go, and that's what those are. But if you see this as the first part, it's like a data packet. In the information world, when data comes to the internet, there's actually layers. And there's a base layer, and then there's where this address is being carried, and this, and all of this stuff. Well, this is kind of like the data packet that comes up. And as soon as it hits, first of all, when the object comes in, there's an ear. There's 3 things. There's contact. There's an ear. There's the object that's coming in, the form. And then the consciousness packet is coming up. It says, I want to hear. And then you're conscious. And then that may lead to clinging, craving, which for the most part it will. And then it disappears. And then something else comes in, and the whole process is just constant, like that. And that's who you are. It is, when you look at your mind, the Buddha figured all of this out before he became the Buddha. Because he said, I just need to know how this works. In the end, you can attain all these jhanic concentration states, but they don't make you smarter. You don't understand craving. You can do all these ascetic practices, which he did for 6 years, go on weird diets, stand on one leg. That didn't work. So he said, well, I can probably just sit down and figure this out on my own. And that's what we're doing, is we're sitting down and figuring it out. And when you 6R, you're letting go of the gross links that are coming up, which are those thoughts that are clouding your mind. And as you let go of those things, you'll get to a deeper level. You'll be up here at habitual tendencies, and then you come into, that's just thoughts. Oh, that's the craving. Craving is different from thoughts. Craving is it's an energy It's a grasping. It's not, grasping is not, it's a pull. You can see this, you can feel it, and you can see it. There's light in this pull, and it goes around something, and then you start to think and proliferate. But it's based on feeling, some maybe good feeling or bad feeling. So if it's a good feeling, then you have delight, and you think about it. But if you see the feeling and you 6R right then, none of that arises. All that stuff, if you can just see in your body, just see how feeling works. There's only feelings happening. Feeling is, the Buddha said, feeling is that which can be felt. That's the definition of feeling. That's all. Sensation. If you feel it, it's feeling. So then you 6R at the feeling level. And you see what's below the feeling, which is contact. Now you can actually see the process of blossoming of the sense base, opening up. It's like a door opens. It can be really sharp, or sometimes it's just a kind of a very soft, like a vibration, or the mind moves toward it. And if you 6R right then, contact doesn't even arise. You don't hear it. That thing is, you don't even hear it. And that's where you get to the quiet mind eventually, where you really don't hear or see things. They're out there, and you're not completely, not hearing.
The way dependent origination works, you have an eye, it hits color and form. As soon as that arises, feeling arises. When the feeling arises, the feeling is either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. If it's a pleasant feeling, right after that your mind says, I like that. That's craving. Right after that, there's all of the reasons why you like that. The thinking about, and the habitual thinking. So how do you overcome lust, hatred, and delusion? As soon as I hits color and form, I consciousness arises. When that consciousness arises, right after that, feeling arises. When your mindfulness is good, when you're able to observe what happens, you'll start to notice that your mind begins to tighten around that object. Now I took eye and color and form, but it's any of the 6 sense doors. It can be a sound, a taste, a smell, a touch, a thought. Right after the feeling arises, that's when that habitual habit that we have of taking that thought or that feeling personally. We take the sight personally. This is my sight. I see. And when we do that, that causes mind to tighten around it. And then you have thoughts about that sight. How you like it, how you don't like it. Lust, hatred. You've got delusion. Delusion is always the false identification of that being personal. That's me, that's mine, that's who I am. That's my sight, That's my sound. I like that sound. I don't like that sound. This is how the craving arises, and it causes more and more pain to arise because we get involved with it and then we try to control it. If it's an unpleasant sound, then we try to make that sound or that sight pleasant, or we try to push it away so we don't have to pay attention to it anymore. If it's a pleasant sight, a pleasant sound, you try to hold on to it. I like this. I don't want it to change ever. I want it to be the same always because it's pleasant. But because everything is part of the universe, and the universe is always impermanent. It's always changing. Nothing ever stays the same, even though your mind would like it to be the same. Everything is in a state of movement. The pleasant thing, after a little while, something else occurs, and it turns into an unpleasant thing. The unpleasant thing eventually turns into another pleasant thing. But the delusion is always that we think it's ours personally. We're very much involved with that tightness and taking all thoughts and all feelings as they are yours, and that's all.
Well expounded. Then you should recall the Sangha, the unsurpassed field of merit. For those who thus recall the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha monks, no fear or trepidation will arise.